Well, we at Rivertowns are delighted to host this evening, and our co-sponsors are the American Association of University Women and the Westchester Black Women's Political Caucus and our new Northwest League, and that's just coming into being, led by Renee Artel. So we thank our sponsors. And we welcome Judy Gorenstein, immediate past president of the State of New York League. And we have with us Kathy Meany, who's president of the Westchester County League. Well, do we have any elected officials in the audience? Not yet, okay. So this event would not have been possible without the great leadership of our president, Susan Maggiotto, and our events committee, with a special thanks to Susan Butterick and Ann Scholl for her work on publicity, and thanks to all of you who helped in so many different ways. So I have some very good news for you. We're having a question and answer format this evening, with questions posed by Senator Shelley Mayer and former Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff. Unfortunately, neither Shelley nor Sandy could be with us tonight, but we will feel their presence through the questions. So there will be audience questions at the end, and President Maggiotto will be circulating around with the microphone to hear your questions. So I want to take a quick minute to tell you about our grassroots nonpartisan leagues. Our Voter Services Committee will be very busy this coming year, conducting voter registration drives and at our high schools and universities, and moderating debates in primary and general elections. Our voter guides will be available online next year, and we're involved with civics education in selected high schools, and we offer exceptional youth programs at no cost to students' families. You can read more about our work on our website, and our events are free and open to the public. We do hope that you would take one of our brochures, and if you're not already a member of the League, we'd love to have you join the League in our fight for democracy, and consider a voluntary donation to our tip jar. Do we have a tip jar?
Yes. Yes.
We do, okay.
It's where the food is.
Okay. Now it is my pleasure to turn the meeting over to our very talented moderator, Susan Butterick, who will introduce our guests. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. And Susan Goodwin did not mention that she is the chairman of our events committee. Am I not close enough? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, so I turned on, I'm just not close enough. I have to practically kiss it. I want to thank Susan Goodwin for that introduction, and to commemorate her as the chair of our events committee. So this entire event pretty well has been put together under her auspices and under her direction. I am a pale substitute for I am a pale substitute for Shelley Mayer, who was to have moderated this event, but could not come at the last moment. And as Susan pointed out, she did supply us with a bevy of questions, as did Sandy Galiff. So I will be mouthing those questions for our two panelists, and then you will get the chance to ask questions at the very end of this session. And our panelists are first Dana Levenberg and second MaryJane Shimsky, both first-term assemblywomen in the New York State Legislature. And I welcome you particularly. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming out tonight. And I'll start right off, since we have limited time, and I'll try to direct the questions and have you field them promptly and efficiently, and we'll get through this. Welcome, says my first index card. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are both new
to the mic.
Speak right into the microphone.
I have to be on top of it, don't I? Okay.
Bring it closer.
Closer still.
That's good.
Okay. Welcome. You are both new assembly members from the river towns, and you are both accomplished women who previously served in government. Tell us, please, a little bit about yourself and the work you did prior to joining the assembly. Mary Jane, would you go first, please?
Sure. Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, usually that's not a problem with me. Before I became, well, I could either start at the very beginning or I'd work my way backwards. But I was born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I left to go to college, never really came back. I moved to New York to go to law school at NYU, and my first job was at the DA's office in Manhattan. When our first son was born, we realized that there was no New York City apartment that would contain him, so we moved up to Hastings, where we bought a house and raised 2 children. We have since downsized, as many of you have. We currently live in Dobbs Ferry. I have 2 academic degrees, graduate degrees. One is my law degree from NYU. I also have a PhD in history from the CUNY Graduate Center. And in case any of you are wondering, I use the history degree at least as much as I use the law degree in this job. When we moved up to Hastings, I started getting involved with a local group of reform-minded Democrats on the village level. And I gradually worked my way up. Shortly after I earned my PhD, I took a job with then Assemblyman Richard Brodsky and worked for him for his last 3.5 years in office. At that point, I ran successfully for county legislature. I served on the Westchester County Board for about 12 years. My focus was mostly on infrastructure issues because those of you who live in the area knew that we had a county bridge that was about to fall on 2 highways. And we also were developing, even then, flooding problems, which are only getting worse as climate change is advancing. I also did a lot of work on public health and environmental issues. Of course, many of these issues intersect. Environmental and infrastructure often go hand in hand, as does public health. When I ran last year, I largely ran on that record, talked about the need to move these issues forward on the Assembly, and I guess that will be the next question. So now, Dana, you can do the story of your life.
It sounds like you've done this before. You're quite right. Dana, that's what we'd like from you, please.
Okay, they really are softball questions. This isn't a debate, right, Mary Jane?
No.
Okay.
No, I think you were born too, so we're good.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, which was a great community to grow up in. Just got my undergraduate degree, but I was very proud of my undergraduate degree from Brown University. Came back and lived in the city for a little while, and I worked in television production. I worked for an ad agency for a few years in an in-house commercial production company, and then I went on to work for Lifetime and Showtime, so I learned a lot about production, and I learned a lot about politics, right then and there, because everything's political. Certainly, producing television shows and advertising for them is. So that was great. Had a baby, moved up to Westchester because my husband was from Worcester and I was from Teaneck, and we obviously in between spot was Westchester, right? That's smack in the middle. And he was actually in advertising, which is how we met. So I got involved early on. We decided one of us was going to be a stay-at-home parent, and even though I was definitely not the one cut out for that, and he was making more money. As we know, that's how it works in this world, unfortunately. Hopefully we're getting better. But I started advocating for my kids when they were in nursery school, and got involved in the local, cooperative nursery school, then PTA, then I became president of the PTA. It was a very, as I always say, it's a very sort of common way that women get involved in politics, which is advocating for their kids. So PTA led to the school board. I ran for the school board in Ossining, and was on the school board for 9 years. 8 of those 9, I started working for Sandy Galiff. And while I was doing that, Catherine Borgia, our county legislator, my good friend, introduced me to local grassroots politics, and I became a member and a district leader in the Democratic Committee here in Ossining. And then, again, working for Sandy, I learned a lot about government. Catherine went on to be town supervisor in Ossining. I took over as chief of staff for Sandy, and we had a great working relationship, although as much as I learned about running her district office, about all of the issues that she was involved with, and obviously, you all know Sandy, she's very involved in reform and in property taxes and women's issues and library aid and education. I learned so much from her about good government. She's an incredible mentor, as was Catherine. But I didn't really totally learn about how the sausage was made until this year. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I did get the opportunity again while I was doing that to learn more about local government. And when a position opened up for town council, I decided I was going to run for town council while still working for Sandy. But then something happened, and I ran for town supervisor. I won, and I was town supervisor for 7 years before I decided to run for assembly when Sandy decided to step down. And with her blessing, I ran and won for state assembly. And that's how I'm here.
Lovely, lovely. And it seems that you both held elected offices, pretty prominent ones, and held the reins of power, at least within your own areas. What propelled you to go for the brass ring, to run for the New York State Legislature? Sandy, why don't, Sandy, sorry.
It's okay. Dana?
Dana, why don't you go first? I'm mixing you up with Sandy.
That's okay, that's okay. It happens.
Yeah.
Again, I think it was just sort of a natural progression. When I knew that she decided that she was going to retire, which, by the way, one of my favorite quotes from Sandy Galiff that I had up on my wall was, "Oh no, Dana, I'm never going to get married, and I'm never going to retire." And then I read it to her every so often, and she said one day, she said, "Well, maybe Dana, maybe one day I'll retire." Maybe. She never really committed to it, but when she decided to retire, it was just an opportunity, and that's sort of how I ended up running for town supervisor. It's sort of how a bunch of different things. It's just sort of, I saw an opportunity, but really, what I was doing was advocating for my community from, again, from when my kids were little to, again, from PTA to school board to town supervisors, advocating for my community, trying to make the world a little bit better, and seeing how you can do that at each of these steps of the way, kind of propelled me to say, well, if I were to run for assembly, I might even have an influence on a bigger portion of the world. And feeling that that was something that I had the power to do, and wanted to try, that's why I did. And I'm very excited to say that I feel that that's exactly what we have been doing. And we learned a lot from our colleagues, and we partner together, and nothing really happens by ourselves. We work with not-for-profits, we work for advocates, League of Women Voters. We're so grateful again to you for all the good work that you do to inspire and to educate and to make democracy stronger. And hopefully that's what we can continue to do in our roles.
Thank you. MaryJane, how about you? What galvanized you to jump from the Board of Legislators to the legislature?
Well, I'm going to try to answer this as honestly but as delicately as possible. The circumstances in my case, were definitely somewhat different from Dana's. There was an incumbent in place. He had been there for some time. He thought he was going to be there for the duration. But then I started hearing from different people who had various concerns. Many of them surrounded, concerned views on vaccinations. And after 2019, there was a vote at the state legislature on ending the religious exemption for vaccinations. After that vote, I had a lot more people coming to me. And I still wasn't ready to pull the trigger. But, you know, people had talked, and then COVID came along. And we all saw two things just dealing with this particular issue. First of all, we finally had our real life personal experience as to how life-saving vaccines could be. I mean, we, our children, our grandchildren, everybody just about gets this whole panoply of vaccines. But we never really personally experienced what happens when you don't have them. And COVID was our real experience with that. And the second one was we saw how various political forces united to really help the anti-vax movement take off. And even the vaccines we have that we know are so effective against things, whether they're measles or diphtheria or so on, if the percentage of people vaccinated drops below a certain point, even the people who are vaccinated are put at risk. And I mean, you are all a policy-aware group. You've seen the same news stories we've seen. And at that point, I started doing what I did when I first decided to run for county legislature. I started calling people and said, hey, what do you think? And I was stunned at how positive the reaction was. And I said, okay. And I ran.
And you hit it just right, it sounds like. And now you both are representing many more people than you did a year ago. And this question is trying to get at how you juggle the being in your district and feeling the pulse of your constituents, and then being in Albany and wheeling and dealing with the other legislators there. How do you manage to balance those two things out? So, just for example, how do you travel back and forth from your district office to Albany? MaryJane, would you take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I drive. My home in Dobbs Ferry is pretty much equidistant between the Yonkers Amtrak and the Croton Amtrak. And we are finding with many of our colleagues from New York City that the Amtrak schedules, even before our latest difficulties, were not reliable. So if you want to not wake up like 6 hours before your meeting and maybe 4 hours before your meeting, you're going to end up having to drive. And dealing with our railroad situation, especially as climate change is causing things like landslide, increased deterioration of buildings and so on, we are going to have to deal with that. The question everybody also asks is, where do you live when you're up there? And there are apartment people and there are hotel people. I came and take care of the one I've got. I have a husband who's a saint who does the best he can. But even when it comes to vacations, I don't want a vacation house. I don't want to cook 3 meals a day. It's a vacation. I'm a hotel person. It took me a while, but I found a hotel that I really liked that fits within the federal per diem, and that I hope will kind of be my forever place, especially since it's only about a quarter of a mile from the Capitol, so there's no additional commuting time. I'm not a fan of long distance driving as much as I have to do it. When we get back from session in the first half of the year, we end up running around a lot. We drive into town maybe Wednesday night. If there are 2 or 3 events in district that evening, we go to those events before we go home. Weekends, there's a little more pressure. I always try to go to everything I could on the weekends, even when I was in the district 7 days a week as a county legislator. But it certainly puts more pressure on you to go to more things on the weekend, because I am a firm believer in field trips, in going to things. And, you know, there's a line from, I believe it was Henry VI, the people must see their king. And it's important to be seen by your constituents, and that's why people go. But there's an even more important reason to go to as many events as possible. And that's because you get to learn. If you go to an exhibit, you go to a program, you learn about things that are going on in your district. You're learning about things that are going on with different demographic groups within your district. That's how you learn. And that's where your best public policy comes from. You talk to people in the audience. You talk to people on the way out. You have a cup of coffee with somebody. You run into somebody in the ladies' room. And somebody makes a comment. You don't know when it's going to happen, if it's going to be that event or the next event. But you are going to hear comments that are going to trigger ideas, that are going to affect what you're going to introduce, how much you're going to advocate and work with other people who have introduced really great things, how you argue for those things, what you might decide to step back on. You're not going to make the right decisions for your district unless you're out in your district an awful lot. So you've got to do it as best you can, as often as you can under the circumstances. Obviously, when we're talking from late June through the holidays, we're not up in Albany nearly as much, and we're able to spend more time with our constituents. And as I said, wherever I go, I always find it a learning experience, and sometimes I find it an incredibly huge learning experience. And I never know when that moment's coming, but it does come on a regular basis.
It's like a blessing, I would imagine. How about you, Dana? How do you manage to?
So I'm just going to remind everybody, MaryJane kind of alluded to it, but that session when we're actually up in Albany voting is January to June, essentially. I mean, we were there a little bit late this year because our budget was late, and that pushed our the rest of the legislative session a little bit late. But so January to June, again, we're juggling during the week. We're up there 1, 2, 3 to 5 days a week. And then back in the district for, again, the rest of the week. So Wednesday to Sunday or something like that. Some people actually do go up Sunday night because session starts on Monday, and, you know, usually at 1 o'clock or something around there. But again, you know, that's when we're focusing on passing the budget, passing legislation, et cetera. And then the rest of the year, we're essentially in the district, although I did have the pleasure of going to Puerto Rico last week for the Somos conference, which is a very big conference, and I see Keisha Palmer-Cousins shaking her head, because she was one of the people who said to me, you have to go to Somos. It was amazing, 2,300 people, colleagues, not-for-profits, lobbying firms, unions, everybody goes to Somos for this period following the election, and basically goes to Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico and New York are so closely tied at the hip. And we have, you know, a very large Latino community here in the 90 district. I felt that it was very important to go down there, and it's hosted by the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force Coalition that is part of the legislature, and it was really amazing. It was an amazing learning experience. There were many panels, many opportunities just to meet people, and as MaryJane was saying, there's such a great opportunity when you just meet people in different places to really learn so much just from the people that you're talking to. So I do try to cut myself into a billion different pieces every weekend and go to as many events as I possibly can, the ones that we're invited to, and then we take a look at the calendars and see the ones that we aren't invited to, but maybe in communities that we haven't been invited to for whatever reason, to make sure that we, really...
Party crashers.
Yeah, party crashers. We want to get to as many things as possible, whether it's the arts, whether it's Eagle Scout events, whether it's veterans events, senior events. This morning, I was up in Peekskill at their Thanksgiving breakfast. I was in there yesterday for a Youth Bureau event, ribbon cuttings, 20th anniversary celebrations, you name it, we get there to recognize people, to thank them for all of the good work that they do here as businesses, as educators, as students. And again, that's where we really hear from people what is happening, what's going on in the district, and what we need to do to help. I also just recently established some legislative committees to help me organize my thoughts around legislation around my mission, which is building healthy communities, environmentally, economically, physically, and mentally, all through the lens of equity. I established 4 legislative committees and brought stakeholders in from around the district to talk to me about both legislation that I'm either a co-sponsor of or have a prime sponsor of or am considering, or just to hear from them about what they think is important that I should be supporting as stakeholders in the community that may have a particular interest in some of the issues around those areas of my mission. So that's just another way that I hear from people, and I do. So far, I've driven back and forth, but as much as I don't like the idea of taking a train that's not reliable or that's going to not operate for a variety of reasons, I'm probably moving to take the train in the next session. So we shall see.
The next question deals with your first impressions as freshman assemblywomen. What was it like descending upon Albany and meeting your colleagues for the first time, sitting in the assembly chamber and being assigned a seat and I suppose a page? I'm not sure. Tell us what it was like. Danny, you start.
Well, it was the honor of a lifetime. It was absolutely amazing to be in that hallowed hall with so many esteemed colleagues, people who, again, had the opportunity to know when I was working for Sandy, who are still serving, and people who've done such incredible work over the many years. And meeting with the freshman class and going up, with MaryJane, it was, we've just been, sort of buddies, right? Our Westchester buddies, freshman buddies, learning as we go and trying to figure it all out. So it was, it's awe-inspiring, it's amazing, the honor of a lifetime, and it's so much fun to bring people up there. My husband's cousin and daughter came one day to session, and I did not think that this 10-year-old young girl was going to really, have the wherewithal to appreciate it, but she thought it was phenomenal. So that we can also pay it forward and be an inspiration to young women and young people of all, to think about what it is that you can do in those hallowed halls, how you can make change, and how you can, really be the voice of the future and of our state government is an incredible opportunity, and it really interesting, fascinating. Again, I think, as I was saying, having worked for Sandy, I had the opportunity certainly to go up there. I was up there for State of the State, but I didn't spend a lot of time in Albany. She always had a legislative director and an office manager, and so luckily I did keep her legislative director on as my legislative director, so I feel like Rebecca brings that institutional knowledge to me and to my office. And I had worked with her when I worked for Sandy as well, so we already had a relationship, and that's been very, very helpful, again, to just navigate. But I turn to my colleagues, I turn to the people who I sit near or I have just learned that maybe I have sort of, I'm on the same trajectory as they are, or that, we sort of share some common beliefs to help navigate some of the systems up there. And even sometimes working with lobbyists I found to be very interesting and advocates. So I've learned a lot from everybody up there, and it's been an incredible experience.
And MaryJane, what's your fix on your first couple of days in the legislature?
Well, a lot of the things run through months. It was amazing how many aspects of the experience reminded me of the transition from high school to college. You're dealing with more difficult work. You're dealing with a much larger arena. And there were times where I would walk into a room and I found exactly the same kinds of anxieties I felt when I was in college. Are people going to want to talk to me? I've never been a big small talk person. Am I going to be able to get through a conversation that will actually make people like me? Are the professors and the dean going to like me? Is leadership going to like me? Are the committee chairs going to like me? Are the people who sit around me going to like me? And for, people talk about policy and likability as if they're two diametrically opposed things, as if you don't have both in the same person. If you're going to be an effective legislator, you have to be good at both. There's no way around that. But I started, most of my colleagues and most of the people on central staff were very welcoming and were very curious about me, about Dana, and really wanted to get to know us and kind of bring us into the fold. The other thing that I found worked, as I said, I'm not really a small talk kind of person, but I started circulating advocacy letters fairly early. I did one urging an increase in funding for local road programs. I did another one with a group that I've been working with for a few years, the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, urging my colleagues to go on a sign-on letter of support to our congressional delegation, urging them to go on a bill to create a national infrastructure bank. And in addition to doing as well as we did getting signatures, I really got to know people that way. And I might have been a little shy to go up to a particular person who represented parts of Rochester or the Finger Lakes or whatever, but I had to go up and ask them to sign my letter. And usually when I did, there would be other conversation, and sometimes, we'd agree to go out for lunch or go out for dinner. And that's how, it was really a great way for me to begin building the relationships that you really need to be able to knit together your 76 votes to get something passed.
Fascinating. Could you explain a little bit what an advocacy letter is? That's a very interesting concept.
Okay, they're called sign-on letters.
Yeah.
You know that in various legislatures, people will pass resolutions in support of different things. At the county board, we would often pass resolutions memorializing certain ideas to the state, to Congress, urging that certain kinds of government actions be taken. Although even in Westchester County, we really weren't a resolution body so much. We would do sign-on letters. So a person who is very interested in a particular issue would draft a letter to say the congressional delegation urging them to support certain legislation or support certain items in the federal budget or whatever. And you would then have it circulated among the other legislators and they would choose to sign it or not. It was generally the way it was done was a very staff-to-staff communication at the Board of Legislators, but there were only 17 of us. So it wasn't like there were any secrets among us anyway, and we'd often talk about these things. But when we were circulating these letters, I actually had a fair amount of mentorship on it from Chris Burdick, who is in the middle of his second term as a state assembly person, has an interest in infrastructure as well. And, this is the place, you send it out, but then I saw people around me do it too. You only get 5 people who read all their emails, and usually if they're reading all their emails, there are a lot of other things they're wanting to get done. But, you see you got 5. So then you start walking around chambers, and you say, hey, you want to sign this? And that's where the relationships start building, and that's where the number of signatures on your letter starts building. And when you finally get everybody's electronic signatures, then you send it out to wherever it's supposed to go. And that's how these letters are born. At this time of year, we're moving toward the governor's budget, which will be introduced the first week generally of January. There are advocacy letters going out now, and I've done a couple for roads in this particular DOT region, Region 8. We actually do have the worst roads in the state, and our rate of deterioration is higher than just about anybody else's. And also a letter just urging general increase in funding for State Department of Transportation.
So this is
And people are sending out dozens and dozens advocating for the different issues and different agencies that they're experts in, not me, I'm an engineer or anything, but people send out letters and people will sign on to them for different issues that they care about.
And also now that the governor is sort of in the process of signing all the legislation that was passed, there's a lot of letters that are circulating to encourage her to sign this particular bill or that particular bill. Please pay attention to me. Hey, look, I have all these other colleagues who say you need to pay attention to this. So again, oftentimes bill's sponsor will circulate those letters now when their bill hasn't yet been signed.
Because the deadline for the governor's signature is what, New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
Yeah. And unsigned by New Year's Day are dead.
I believe that's the case, yes. Okay.
Wow. You're telling us how the sausage is made. That's quite fun. Next question on policy priorities. Maybe just a single one from each of you. Dana, would you begin? What was your top policy priority in the session that just ended?
Well, I guess I'm going to have to say environment, protecting the Hudson specifically. Sandy had actually started, and then I got to follow on in her seat, being part of the decommissioning oversight board for Indian Point. So Indian Point closed while she was assembly member. I honestly, I worked very hard on all of the issues surrounding it, leading up to that while I was working for Sandy. But then, again, when I became assembly member, I had a seat on the decommissioning oversight board. And we learned that as part of, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, as part of the decommissioning process, Holtec, which was the company that took over from Entergy to actually decommission the plant, was going to be dumping millions of gallons, 1.5 million gallons of water into the Hudson River that would still contain tritium. So they were able to treat most of all of the radionuclides out except for tritium. And according to them and according to many, this was the best option to get rid of this, the remains of what was in the spent fuel pools, which again still has this tritium in it. There was an absolute outcry from the public, and we worked very hard to pass a bill that said, and basically the federal government has oversight of nuclear power plants and how they're decommissioned, and there's not much you can do to say you can't do this if the federal government says you can. Except working with advocates, we found what we thought was essentially a loophole in giving the state more autonomy or more jurisdiction over what goes into the river, which had to do with the economic impact of anything that went into the river, including radionuclides. So we, along with Senator Harcum and we sponsored legislation that would not allow the dumping of radionuclides into the Hudson River because of the economic impact that it would have on the communities along the Hudson and up and down, including New York City. And so that was a complicated bill to get passed, but we had a lot of advocacy, again, from all of our Hudson River communities. Certainly, we had a huge number of sponsors, and we had about between 400,000 and 500,000 signatures on a petition that said, don't do this. Many municipalities signed on to advocacy letters saying, don't do this. And the governor did sign the bill, and I would say that that was my number one achievement, I guess, and policy priority for this last session. And certainly, it was in itself, it was a huge education in how the sausage gets made. I can tell you that for sure, because it was not easy to get it to the floor of the assembly.
You were tackling a dragon at that point, not just any little...
Well, there was pushback from some of the collective from some of our unions, because essentially Holtec was threatening to cut their jobs. Said, if you don't go out and, oppose this legislation, I'm sorry, but you're going to lose your jobs. And, that's just plain dirty. And this was after they had essentially told us, at this side of their mouth, that there were not going to be any loss of jobs, and there's going to still be plenty of work for everybody. And we know that to be true because no matter what, they still have to continue to decommission the plant. So there's plenty of work for everybody. And just because it wasn't going their way, which by the way was the faster way, not the slower way, so it takes more time to come up with different potential ways to do this safely, doesn't mean that there's not going to be work to do, and there's going to be plenty of work for many, many years.
And to MaryJane, did you have a specific top policy priority this last session?
Well, I recognize this as a multi-year project, and when you're talking about infrastructure, it's definitely a multi-year project. I decided that the way to break in was to make some impact in the budget, and I chose to advocate for increases in the budget for state programs that give money to our local governments to help repair local roads. I did an advocacy letter and had it signed by a few dozen legislators, mostly in the suburbs, many of them in this DOT region that has been so hard hit. There were others who were advocating for the same thing, so it's hard to tell who is responsible for what, but all of us put together. We did get $100 million extra dollars in the state budget for local roads. Now, that is $100 million if it's between you and me. That's a lot of money. If you're talking about tens of thousands of miles of road in New York State, not so much. It did help take the edge off of the inflation that our local governments were feeling with the cost of road repairs, but it really didn't do more than that. But I figured it was a good entry point because I would learn the process. I would learn the people. And as I moved on, I would learn the different rules that apply to different kinds of infrastructure repairs and learn who I have to talk to, what they're more amenable to and less amenable to. So we're getting ready to do more and fan out more this year, and I hope to be continuing in that direction.
And that the secondary question to this is there any unfinished business that you're going to be carrying forward into this next session? And you just answered that. You're going to pick up the pieces or what remains.
According to the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, our shortfall nationally is $7 trillion with a T. So we got a lot out there that needs to get done.
Dana, how about you? Any unfinished business you want to pick up and run with?
Goodness gracious, there's lots of unfinished business. But I would say that, the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest unfinished business for all of us is housing. Housing is, our huge challenge, and we need a lot more of it. We need it to be all levels of affordability, and we need it fast. And first of all, housing doesn't happen fast, but the governor introduced as part of the budget a housing bill that unfortunately didn't, in the opinion of the legislature, effectively address some of the issues around affordability, around helping people with housing stability, in other words, staying within places that they were living so that they could continue to afford instead of having to bounce around. And it didn't, it addressed density in a way that was anathema to many localities. So we needed to look at some of those issues more closely. Actually, Chris Burdick and I, Assemblymember Burdick and I, recently hosted a housing summit with some of our local municipalities to get some feedback around issues that they had with the proposal and suggestions for how we could move forward. We also had local not-for-profits as well as local developers who work on affordable housing to talk, and we were with help from Pace Land Use Law Center and Housing Action Council and some other groups. We got some really good feedback, and we're hoping to introduce some legislation that might be more palatable. Whether or not our legislation wins the day, I don't know that that's going to happen, but certainly we know that elements of legislation can make its way into a governor, into a program bill that the governor might have introduced, or into a bill that somebody in the housing committee or the housing chair might introduce. So we're hoping to move the needle forward, and that I think is some of the biggest unfinished business. I will say I'm very happy that today Clean Slate was signed into law, so that's super exciting. Having Sing Sing in my district, I'm very focused on criminal justice issues, and this was one that was supported by so many, including the business community. We know that it's going to really help millions of people to get back on their feet and be productive members of our communities and help them be more effective and happy and successful in their lives. So I'm very excited to have supported that, and so glad that it got signed into law today. There's more work to be done in every single area of this world. So,
Tell us about your favorite committee assignment, because committees have a lot to do with your ability to get something done. MaryJane, would you start? Just your favorite one, not all of them. I know you have a lot.
I do like corporations, commissions, and authorities a lot. The breadth of it is really broad. It spoke to my infrastructure leanings because we have primary regulatory authority for Con Ed and for, oversight for Con Ed and for Metro North, which are both extremely important here. We also deal with the authorities and agencies that help process many of our environmental bonds and water quality bonds. So there's a lot there that if you're going to be working on infrastructure on the state level, that is really the place to be. But they do a lot of other things too. Just as one example, Amy Paulin had a bill which would allow for a new way of, a more environmentally friendly way of dealing with human remains. Doing cremation actually takes up a great deal of energy, and as a result is problematic environmentally. We're also running out of space to bury bodies, and there are questions how responsible continuing that use for land stewardship maybe. Essentially, this would permit, for want of a better term, the composting of human remains, which, as I said, is much better for the environment and for the people who are going to be surviving. That went through corporations, commissions, and authorities because they have jurisdiction over cemeteries and the laws dealing with the disposal of human remains. And when you get the committee agenda, there are going to be all kinds of things and dealing with all aspects of life because everything has some kind of legal structure to it, and that is the main thrust of the committee.
Great. Dana, how about you? Have you got a favorite committee?
No.
You like them
I
all.
love them. I really, it's so funny. So I did get this great bill passed and was also signed into law, which was for our local libraries that are not school district libraries or municipal libraries, but they're association libraries. Not like Austin, but they had to collect so many signatures just to get their budget on the, as a referendum item. Just to go out to vote, they needed to collect signatures. It was as if they were a candidate running for office. This is crazy. We actually got the number of signatures that they needed to get to get the budget out to the people to vote on down to a reasonable number. That was in the libraries. That went through the libraries committee. So I was very excited about that. Actually, it also went through elections, but. Those two were that was very important to me because I do have a couple of those libraries in the district, but also environmental conservation. Again, that's where the Save the Hudson bill went through. On the corrections committee, and obviously clean slate. These are all areas that are very, very important to me. And then local governments, obviously coming from working in a local government, that's very close and near and dear to my heart. And I always skip one, but housing. I've already talked about how important housing is. So I have 5 phenomenal committees. I can't pick a favorite. There's more that I want to be on, but we can't split ourselves into that many pieces.
No, 5 is about.
5 is good. Yeah, 5 is great. We're so excited. Foundation aid is fully funded now, and we got to vote on that this year, so that was great. And through education and so many bills that have come through the health committee, and with Amy Pollan as the new chair of that, we really do have a lot of really important and powerful folks in Westchester, and it's great to be part of this legislative body and continue to do the good work that we're doing.
What about mentors or mentrixes? How do you say female mentors?
Mentors.
Mentors. Okay, we won't mess with gender then. Do you have any? Do you feel the need for any?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Who doesn't? Oh my gosh.
Tell us, Dana.
Well, I mean, I still call Sandy on a regular basis, let's face it. She's a great mentor. I do talk to Amy. Shelley is a great mentor also. And, MaryJane and I, again, we talk to each other fairly regularly. We consult with one another. I have the people who sit next to me. I have Ken Zabrowski on one side, Gina Salidi on another side. I'm good friends with Harvey Epstein and Anna Kellis, and Carrie Werner, who chairs libraries, was really helped me shepherd that bill through. So that was wonderful. They're a lot of phenomenal people, and I have so much respect for all of my colleagues. I turn to them all for different reasons, I would say, and I just kind of look over my shoulder. Crystal Peoples-Stokes, Majority Leader, phenomenal, and again, just amazing people to just look towards. I have good relationships with Gary Pretlow, who is the head of the Westchester delegation in the Assembly, and just you kind of have to look towards everybody to be your mentor, I think, especially in your first year. I mean, I look forward to the day when I can mentor, and Chris Burdick. Chris Burdick's been great. Again, as a fellow town supervisor, you know, I turn to him and Steve Otis regularly for advice and counsel. And definitely our Westchester colleagues are easy, and then folks that we either align with, Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, I don't know, Catalina Cruz. There's so many wonderful people in the assembly, and they're all mentors to me.
MaryJane, your turn.
Well, the advantage that Dana and I both brought to the office is that because we were so involved in government here in Westchester County, we already knew everybody in the Westchester delegation. And they'd already been helping us with various issues that we were dealing with in our respective roles. As we were preparing to take a new office, they were giving us all kinds of advice as well. My bunkie in my assembly district is Andrea Stewart Cousins. And for years now, we go out for lunch several times a year. And you know, I ask her for stuff, and then she tells me what I have to hear. And Shelley Mayer I've known for a long time. Pete Harkin, I cut my eye teeth at the county board while Pete was majority leader. So we got to know each other really well there. I've known Steve Otis for a long time. On certain things for a long time, he was like my first call. Chris Burdick, I already talked about how he helped me master the art of the sign-on letter. Gary Pretlow his temperament is fantastic, and he's always good to bounce things off of. And Amy Paulin and I have known each other for well over 20 years. And what was interesting was my mother passed away last weekend, and I've gotten various condolences from colleagues and from other people in the community. And I didn't realize how well Amy and I knew each other until I read her condolence text to me. I said, gee, she knew all that? We really do know each other very well, and obviously when you know someone that well, and I've gone to her many times, you know, if I'm wondering which strings to pull on first, second, and third to get something done, she's often a great advisor. And then Dana's right. As we've met people, everybody's willing to be an aunt and uncle or a parent or a grandparent at some point. My bench, we made it a point of honor that we were assigned to the back row, but I have Joanne Simon, who represents actually my old neighborhood in Park Slope that my husband and I moved from. Is chair of the Ethics Committee, has been very involved in environmental and infrastructure issues. Right next to me is Fred Thiel, who is the longtime chair of the Local Governments Committee. And when Village and Corporation, well, actually the first day I sat down, I started talking about Village and Corporation, which is like this huge issue in the town of Greenberg in particular. And he said, I'm so glad you're here. We're going to work on this together, and we're going to get something done. And we did get 2 bills passed, which are not whole loaves, but they're certainly half loaves. And now we're waiting to see what the governor's office is going to do with them. And then on the other side of him is the guy who's going to be really ticked off at the answer I gave on my favorite committee. He's Bill Magnarelli, who's chair of the Transportation Committee. And when it came time to deal with what kind of funding increases to advocate for and things like that, Bill was very generous with his time and with his advice, and he was extremely helpful. Plus, there's this great Italian pastry place between his house in Syracuse and Albany. And it turns out, as an annual thing, this is the first year I got to experience it, You know, he brings in this whole big box
Yeah, I know
of
about that.
wonderful, you're on the wrong side of Chambers, you're on the other side. And they were some of the best Italian pastries I ever had in my life. But sometimes it's the things that make you comfortable, that make you happy, that open up. There is some discussion lately when people were talking about how the negotiations are going to happen that are going to allow things in the Middle East to move forward. And one of the things that somebody was talking about was how if you're dealing with a very difficult issue, you never start the conversation with the very difficult issue. You start it over lunch and you talk about the food, and then you talk about what you're going to do over the weekend, which in our case is nothing exciting anyway, where you're going on vacation this year, you know, and eventually you work your way around to it. But all that discussion is some of the grease that helps move the gears along, so when you're ready to talk about the difficult stuff, you already have a history of good conversation with the person you have to negotiate with. And that's where things like Italian pastries come in. I mean, when you want to talk about how the sausage gets done, maybe we should talk about how the pastry gets done. That is really how you're able to move ahead and become effective.
Your terms are limited to just 2 years. Still too far from the mic, sorry. Your terms are limited to only 2 years, and so you're kind of having to run for re-election all the time. How does that strike you as difficult? Do you think there might be a better solution, or are you content to accept the way it works?
Well, how you get something like that changed.
Let me focus that
it's
to Dana.
okay, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't direct it properly.
That's okay. I mean, I think that all of us would agree that that's really frequent, and I don't think any of us like to have to do the fundraising that goes along with having to run every 2 years, although, you know, obviously part of that is talking to people, listening to people, and understanding what issues are, which is a good thing. But I also think that the public probably wouldn't look that favorably upon us as legislators saying, oh no, we want to extend those terms, I do think people are very frustrated, but I also think people like to be in control of their legislature and have more control, so if they don't like the bums, they can throw them out. Hopefully you don't see us as bums, but you know, I think that, again, having had a 2-year term as town supervisor, it's a lot, because, you know, the learning curve as a first-time legislator, at least, is pretty big. And then once you're in, you know, you want to actually make a difference, and you need a little time to get things done. I think the average time to get a bill passed in Albany is 7 years. So, you know, to get any work done, it takes a long time. And building relationships and understanding, you know, what it takes to get things done takes more than 2 years, there's no doubt. So it's frustrating. It's certainly something I'd be willing to work on if I thought that there was a broad-based support for it. I'm not sure that there is, even though people understand that it's too frequent, and people are saying, oh wait, didn't you just, you know, I say, oh yeah, time to run again, right now, just after the last election. Wait, didn't you just run? Yes, but time to run again. So again, I think that it's too frequent. I do think 2 years is too short, but I don't know that there's going to be political will to change it.
MaryJane, how about you? Do you echo Dave's sentiment?
I remember when I was on the County Board of Legislators, I was in a district where after I first won, no one ran against me. So essentially, I was one of the people who covered the office, while our colleagues who were in more marginal districts and were always contested were running out to campaign, go to more events, and do call time to raise money and so on. And I'd look and I'd say, oh God, those poor people. I don't think I could ever do that. Now I'm at the point where I have to make sure I'm ready for a challenge next year. And it's an awful lot. And I think the one thing that Dana did mention that people really do need to consider when you're talking about, say, 2 years or 4 years, is the more time you have to spend raising money and the more campaigns you have to fund, it does make you more beholden to people who your constituents might not want you to be beholden to. So it's something to really consider, but here's the other argument against doing it, is our sessions in Albany have a certain amount of bandwidth. And if you take time to do one thing, other things suffer. For example, the number of bills we passed this year, I think, was substantially lower than average. And a big part of the reason for that was it took us an extra month to get the budget done. We're not going to get that extra month back. And the result of that is that we didn't get necessarily to spend as much time as it would have taken to deal effectively with certain issues. So if we take time to have the conversations it would take to get the term, the year, the number of years in a term changed, that means we're not getting something else done. And that's probably something else that you would much rather see us get done. So I think that we probably would, for public policy reasons, just want to suffer along.
Accept the status quo.
Yeah.
Good answer then. 2 more questions, and we're a little bit after 8. So would you like one of the 2, or would you like to entertain
One would be,
both?
I was actually trying to make it to something that's over at 8:30, which is,
Or maybe, is there a way we could do speed round with them? You know,
Yeah.
like 1-sentence answers or
Yeah.
1-word answers?
yeah, we could just,
Do they admit to that?
Sure, they do.
okay.
Here's the first one. And I'll ask MaryJane first. Have you experienced or witnessed evidence of overt or implicit sexism in your time in the Assembly? The answer is yes or no.
Implicit?
Okay,
Not that much, though.
that's good.
Implicit versus explicit, I would say.
Explicit.
I would say implicit
And not explicit.
versus explicit. Yes, implicit more than explicit, yes.
Okay.
There's a little bit of it.
What's the ratio of males to females in the Assembly?
I know that the number of female assembly members is well over 30%, and that's a key number because political scientists have found that in order for women to really change the nature of a body and how a body works, the key threshold number is 30%, and we're well past that.
That's good to know. Final question. What advice would you give to young people interested in running for office, given your own experience to date? And make that in 25 words or less. Dana, you start. What advice?
All right. Well, get involved in your local party. That's number 1. That's grassroots politics at its best, or if there's a young Democrats or young Republicans group that is in the area, get involved in that and start to find out what's happening in your local community. I mean, obviously, I, again, got involved starting out at the school board level, but find where your interest lies and start with that, whether it's an advocacy group or a local committee.
Do it for the right reasons.
All right. Excellent.
Just do it.
Nice and succinct. Now we're going to turn the...
Time for a couple questions.
I really was hoping to get to this other event, and you guys started so late, so let me just go with Mary Jane for some question, and then I just want to find out where we're at.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Quickly.
I happened to hear on the radio today somebody very vehemently talking about GE and the Hudson River. And it's been going on for 15 or so years, and you're talking about it's totally unsatisfactory. And what's your notice? What do you know about what's going on?
Well, nothing stays in a riverbed forever as a general rule. And when I remembered the original settlement, I wasn't happy with it then, so I think we probably do have to revisit it.
Get any other question?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep things within but yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, well, I don't know if you're, whatever, it's okay. I think I have a tiny bit more time than I thought, so.
I'll be quick. Okay, I know you're both aware very well what the League of Women Voters does and how we register voters, etc. We are really focusing on youth. We're focusing on our college campuses, our high schools, but there's still something lacking. How can we as a league, as we're out there, create the fire for young leaders to be involved, to be out there voting, etc.? We have a presidential primary that's going to be April 2nd in New York State. Early voting is March 23rd. We basically have a couple months after the holidays to light these fires. What would be your recommendation?
I think that we just need to tap, again, I always say, kind of tap into young people's interests and passions. I mean, certainly young people are more focused on presidential elections than they are on local elections, on local issues. But the issues that are, really popping, I mean, some of the issues that certainly popped in my recent survey, are around gun violence, or around climate change, and I'm sure around abortion. Those are seemingly, those are the issues, and we know what's happening around the world also is certainly igniting a fire under many young people. So what the issues of the day are is how I think we, get people interested, and then understanding how that vote matters towards making change. I don't think that there's a silver bullet to any of that, but again, I think, social media is, certainly a way to meet people where they're at and meet young people on the social media platforms that they're using most, and looking at most would be a way to get them engaged. And so having more young people involved in the league, or the young person's league of young women voters, would maybe be a strategy, I guess.
Historically speaking, young people get involved when there are issues that are compelling to them. They're probably more policy-driven than many other voters. Like I said, think about the Vietnam War. We have what might be called in military terms a target-rich environment for young people. You've got gun violence. You've got war in the Middle East. You've got reproductive choice. You've got student loan debt. You've got affordability of housing. All of these things are things that affect young people every day, and they are things that also make them worry about the future. Same thing with LGBTQAI rights. The same thing with all kinds of racism and sexism and other forms of bigotry. And we've got, like I said, I cannot imagine a more issue-driven environment that will compel young people to go out next year. But now we're going to have to see how the various choices motivate them.
All right, we'll just take one more question here and we'll wrap it up. Thank you. Hi.
I want to address the issue of pending legislation on medical aid and dying. Okay. First of all, I want to thank both of you for being sponsors of the bill, and I also want to thank the League of Women Voters for coming out publicly and supporting this legislation. For those of you who don't know, it's a bill that would allow a medically, terminally ill but mentally competent adult to request medication to end their suffering if they so choose. This law is also legal right now in New Jersey and 10 other states. This bill, as you both know, was introduced in 2015. It's now 8 years later. It has not moved at all in the legislation in New York. And my question to you is, for those people here in the audience who may support this bill and other people, what would you recommend to all of us that may support it to help move this so that we might pass it in the 2024 election, legislative session?
I guess my question is, do you know who or why it's being, who are the biggest opponents? And
From what I know, I've been advocating since 2015, Dana, as you know.
yeah.
So
So have the opponents changed, or are they the same?
they're the same. I mean, we get pushback from some of the religious groups who do not believe it is aligned with their specific beliefs. And we also get some pushback from the disability community. As you also know, as sponsors of the bill, disability in and of itself is not a condition for requesting medication. You have to be terminally ill, and a disability in and of itself is not a terminal illness. So I don't want to get into a political discussion here about disability, and that is not my point. In terms of religious, I have total respect for people's religious beliefs. However, the legislation does not require people to take medication. It is merely an option that people can or cannot use. I come from this from a very personal perspective for two reasons. My husband passed away in 2014. He suffered for 8 years with a progressive neurological disease similar to ALS. Okay, he didn't even have the physical ability to end his life. That's how atrophied he was. And his death, he had to resort to what was called voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And it took him 12 days to die. Nobody should have to suffer like that. It is inhuman. I put down 8 dogs in my life, and that has been more merciful than what I had to do for my husband. And I took care of him 24/7 for 8 years. Right now, I'm on my 3rd cancer. Okay, I survived breast and lung cancer over the last 20 years. Okay, and right now I have lymphoma. Right now I'm healthy, but I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And I really believe that I should have an option of how I am treated at the end of my life. This state prides itself on bodily autonomy.
I mean, obviously, I couldn't agree with you more, as you know. I'm just trying to figure out from a strategic point of view, again, where the obstacles lie in the Assembly or the Senate, and again, I think that's the area to target, is sort of where are the specific obstacles, either in members or how we can just build support.
Right. I mean, we get all different answers there, I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Yeah.
Sometimes we hear, that the members have to hear from their constituents. Sometimes we hear we don't have enough votes. Last year at the end of the legislative session, we had the votes.
Right.
And it was not brought to the floor.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say that last session was probably different from a number of the preceding sessions because we went so late with the budget. It kind of meant we couldn't get, as MaryJane was saying, we couldn't get as many bills passed in the Assembly, as a result of being so late with everything else. So hopefully this year that won't be the case. I can't say that knowing that now, but I think that, you can't ever stop trying. So that's all.
MaryJane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that a lot of people don't really know what the bill is not. I have my own personal story. My mother just passed away on Saturday. She had 2 kinds of cancer, in addition to having real serious quality of life issues with some advanced type 2 diabetes. And what ended up happening was the pain was getting so bad, she was just pumped so full of morphine that she couldn't eat or drink anymore, and that's eventually how it happened 4 days later. It's been in places that have done it, and as you pointed out, there are a number of states who have done it. Number one, it is very rarely used. Very rarely used. You're talking about 2 figures. You're talking about scores of people, tens of people, in a whole state of millions of people. And there are the kinds of safeguards you would want. And it's really people who are in horrible, horrible situations of extremis, similar to what your husband went through.
And I'll also say that this is an equity issue. Let's also be honest. Every day in hospitals, people take, I can refuse medication, okay, and die. And that's legal. Nobody can force me to do chemotherapy. And I can just die. And that's okay. I can ask to have tubes taken off of me, and I can die, and that's legal. So it's amazing to me that we can't get a law for medication, because there's no difference. And there's an equity issue here. We know that people in wealthier communities, they have doctors that are doing this every single day. But in communities that are poorer, it's not happening. I'm going to disagree with that. I didn't mean to monopolize, but
Thank you so much.
I would encourage people that support it.
And thank you for your compassionate comments. I just wanted to say that when we talked about having this program, we in our Rivertowns League thought it would be a great idea, a good idea, but I had no idea what a great idea it was going to turn out to be. I so appreciate, and we all do, your time and your thoughtfulness and your candor. This was just wonderful, and I'm so happy that we recorded it, and we'll make the recording available to you, and it'll be on our YouTube channel, but for anyone else, of course, you can distribute it. And thank you so much again. So appreciative.
Thank you so much for the
Yeah,
opportunity.
thank you. This was wonderful.